Hello, my name is Danielle Wanke, and I worked as a technical writer for Mr. Cooper in Dallas, Texas. First, let's discuss a little bit about Mr. Cooper and what the company does. Mr. Cooper is the largest non-bank mortgage company and one of the top 5 mortgage lenders in the nation. In 2018, Mr. Cooper initiated a rebrand from its former name, NationStar Mortgage. The rebrand was intended to create a more personal interaction with the customer so they would think of Mr. Cooper as a person rather than a faceless mortgage company. Now let's talk about how I got hired. I began my career with Mr. Cooper in the fall of 2018 while I was finishing up my bachelor's in technical communication. I was notified about Mr. Cooper's technical writing internship through the department's weekly email and internship notifications. I contacted the professor that was helping students find internships and was encouraged to send my writing samples to the manager. From there, I received a call from Sarah Pagan, my current VP, and scheduled a screening call. After that, I was contacted again about a second interview that would be in person at the office. Once I completed that interview, I was offered the intern position. While I was an intern, I was offered a position during the summer of 2020, and I began to work full-time as a technical writer. Next, we'll talk about my team and where we fit in amongst all of the other business units at Mr. Cooper. My team lies within the Change Governance Office. This team supports the overall enterprise risk and compliance department by managing all policies, procedures, standards, and any other documentation within our document repository, Archer. Our team also handles the following areas: risk governance, risk reviews, project management, change of law, and information governance. Generally, any content that is presented to audits, exams, investors, regulators, state and federal governments, and created by the business will be ingested and overseen by the risk and governance team. To further break down our team and understand where I fit in the company, we created an additional look at how our team is constructed. First, we have our Change Governance Office, which is where the technical writers and our senior policy analysts are. We also have our Regulatory Change Governance, which is also our Change of Law team. We have our Risk Change Governance, which is generally our project management team. And we also have our optics support members, which are based in Chennai, India. Let's take a look at the different job duties and responsibilities that I have as a Technical Writer 1. As a technical policy writer, I am tasked with editing and maintaining all of our policies, procedures, and standards that are housed within our document repository, Archer. Additionally, I also manage and field any requests that are received to the policy office inbox. I also create and manage SharePoint tickets that are received from the line of business and later ingested into Archer. I also take on training and mentoring our technical writing interns and develop our training plan for SMEs and any new approvers that are coming into the documentation process. I also work with the lines of business to produce accurate documents and to make sure that our documents are updated in a timely manner. I also field research requests and go into Archer, and I often will pull different data or information that people who are not so accustomed to Archer may not be able to find. I also work various error reports that are sent to me daily so I can identify and remediate any documents that may be stuck along the process or maybe floating and just not assigned to anyone yet. So I'm able to go in and make sure we don't have any documents that get lost or are hiding somewhere or maybe just deleted by Archer. I also assist with ad hoc projects as needed. Often we tag in on different projects that are creating new software. Often we have new processes that are created or automated that need to be documented. So we try to stay on top of any projects throughout the company to make sure we are getting all of the correct documentation into Archer. Next, let's take a quick look at the different softwares and tools that I use daily to complete all of my job duties and responsibilities. As I've mentioned before, Archer is Mr. Cooper's document repository. It's also considered our system of record. Now, Archer is not technically used for document repository or document management. Generally, Archer is a risk and compliance function to house different tickets and other functionalities. However, Mr. Cooper was able to create a document function within Archer. We also use Microsoft Office, which includes Excel and Word. We use both of those for reporting. Oftentimes we use Word documents to get edits from some of our SMEs or approvers. We also use SharePoint, HTML, SQL, Zoom, Outlook, and Composer, which is an open source HTML editor that helps us store HTML for documents. This next section will detail the project that I spent the most of my time on during my practicum, as well as a few of the products created during the completion of this project. This project that we worked on did not have a specific name. However, it was a push to complete 400 plus annual reviews by the end of the year. This is part of an exam that was sent down from the CFPB, so we have to complete this to make sure that we are still in good standing with them. Now, this means that we are now having to review a lot of documents that have not been on an annual review cycle. So our procedures are just now getting on an annual review cycle, which means we are editing a lot of documents that may not have been updated since about 2016. Additionally, we have multiple project managers and my VP who are tracking and reporting on this entire project. Thankfully, we are at 86% complete so far. This specific artifact shows part of the process that we have to go through when editing and updating our documents. The top picture shows that we have quite a few questions that we needed to ask the SME because we had a lot of gapping questions or just things we needed to specify once we saw what our updates were. Generally, we see a lot of highlights that are used within our documents so that everything is tracked within Archer and everything can be viewed at a later date. Now the picture on the bottom shows what the section will look like once it's completed, once we've gathered all the correct information and then applied all of the style guide requirements to the said section. Once all of the updates for the document have been ingested and worked, what we are then able to do is push the document to publication. Once the document is republished in Archer, we actually have a process that kicks off right after, and we have a SharePoint site that houses PDF copies of all of our documents. So once our document is ready for publishing, we have an automated process that kicks in overnight that will reprint the document with a new internal use watermark and the new document and content to the site for anyone in the company to view at their leisure. With such a big initiative to push the updating of so many documents, we did run into some big challenges. One of the largest challenges that I personally ran into was dealing with team members that were brand new to Mr. Cooper. Often these team members had not worked with HTML or were not used to working with a system that looked like Archer. This meant that I had to create and send different job aids to them. I had to create some sort of help documentation quickly so that they were able to go in and complete their approvals or provide their updates as needed. Often I also found myself taking time to schedule Teams calls or quick Teams trainings with different groups to make sure they could all figure out what they needed to do and complete everything in a timely manner. This just took a lot of extra time out of my day with the amount of documents in our queue, I really needed to spend as much time with our documents as I could. However, I was excited that I was able to work with different team members and new team members because I was able to influence their first dealings with the policy office and how they work within Archer. Additionally, Archer itself is very buggy. We go through a third-party vendor to acquire Archer and their services. However, they also use a third party for a lot of the code that they use within their text boxes. That being said, there is an issue with the code which causes random HTML scrambles through in many of our documents. And this can be, on long and short documents, which meant we were spending an additional hour to an hour and a half on documents just to make sure that the structure and style was correct. And lastly, the biggest challenge that I think every technical writer faces is trying to push the priority of documentation or just the urgency to get documentation corrected and completed. Let's take a look at some additional outcomes that I experienced from my practicum. Some of the biggest things that I learned was that annual review schedules are necessary to maintain accurate and updated documentation. I think it was a mistake for the policy office to rely on the business units to submit updates for their documents when they experience documentation changes or process changes, because documentation is not their priority or part of their day-to-day duties. Which rolls right into my second bullet of documentation is not everyone's priority. It became extremely frustrating when I wanted to make sure documents got done or completed on time, but I didn't receive the same cooperation from other approvers or other SMEs. Additionally, business units may just not have the bandwidth to stay on top of changes and request document updates themselves. So it does require the technical writers to be more on top of advocating for better documentation or just better documentation practices. During my practicum, I realized that UNT really prepared me for all of the different softwares that I would come into contact with, the different people that I would meet and experience, and more specifically, these are the 4 classes that really impacted or made me feel prepared for this practicum. For instance, TECM 4250 helped me become familiar with procedural documentation and just understanding what your audience needs out of the documentation. In the Digital Literacies for Professional Communicators class, we were able to work hands-on with a new content management system, which helped me understand our own content management system and where we could make improvements. Additionally, there was editing technical documents, which of course helped reinforce the levels of edit, but also helped me understand the best practices for editing and dealing with authors of content. Lastly, information design for electronic media was great at showing me the basics of web design. Also, it introduced me to working with HTML, which was probably the biggest help for myself. In conclusion, I am super thankful for the opportunity that I had when I got to become an intern, but also just becoming full-time. And working with this project, I was able to network with other employees. I was able to really understand new processes and gain more insight into where a lot of our updates were coming from. I also gained a lot of experience training. We had a lot of new team members that were coming in and working on the documentation process, and I've met a lot of new friends and really awesome coworkers through that process. I also just have a greater knowledge of overall processes across the company and just got to talk with a lot of higher up employees as well, which really just helped me feel better about a lot of the things that we were able to do with documentation, and it also validated the reason why we were there. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation.